Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast. A growing number of Canadians in their 20s and 30s are delaying parenthood or choosing not to have kids at all. And for a second year in a row, Canada's fertility rate is at an all-time low. According to Statistics Canada, there's now only 1.26 children being born for every woman, which puts us in a small club of countries with very low birth rates, places like Italy, Japan, and South Korea, which have faced prolonged demographic declines. While Canada's population continues to grow thanks to a 50-year high in immigration, economists are warning that this dynamic presents a unique set of challenges. Here to talk about those challenges and how we might address them is Armine Yalnizyan. She's a Canadian economist and columnist with the Toronto Star, also the Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers. Armine, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
What do we know about why the Canadian fertility rate continues to decline?
It's declining for the same reasons it's declining all over the world. More women are working harder to help their households meet costs. This is about a 40-year phenomenon. So women aren't quite as significant workers in the labor market as men, but getting very close to it. And about 50% of the employed workforce is female. And the other thing that has happened since the pandemic is housing costs have soared. And it is very difficult to have a family formation where you could afford both childcare and mortgages, but even rents are out of reach. So with these costs rising and women deferring having children for other reasons that are also economic in nature, and with very poor leave provisions and childcare provisions, access to affordable childcare provisions, people are just choosing to take a pass on the opportunity to have children.
What does this mean for a country like Canada? It was interesting. The OECD put out a report not so long ago, and it said declining fertility rates put the prosperity of future generations at risk. That sounds serious.
Yeah, I mean, we've probably been talking about the debt that we're passing on to our kids that has been financial and governmental in nature. This is the real debt. And it is being handed off to a whole new generation of people that are having a lot of difficulty just doing the things that being human should be, because we're not supporting each other enough. But I have to say that even in nations where these policies are really generous, we're seeing falling fertility rates. It's a social experiment that is playing out right now, and it's happening all over the world. And I'm not sure it's a terrible thing, but it is certainly going to be a challenging thing, and it's going to upend a logic that we have had in the economy, which is that we have surplus labor, and that has been the case for 40 years. We're now moving into a prolonged period of time when workers are actually going to be very valuable resources, because you can't put money to work without workers.
One of the things that report from the OECD said is that the shrinking working populations could lead to aging societies that place significant social and economic pressures on governments, notably to increase expenditures on pension and health services. So for our economy, tell me a bit more about this. What do you see as the impact of this?
Oh, yeah, we're going to be spending more on the care economy. When you've got the smallest working age cohort we've had in 60 years, and actually turning around and saying more of these people are going to need more help. Did you know the fastest growing element of the population is those aged 80 years of age and older? Not all of them need care, but a growing number of a growing number will need care. And so, we've got about 7 million people that are currently aged 50 to 65. They're going to, in the next 15 years, they're going to age into the category of being a senior. Most seniors don't work. Some do, but they don't work when they're 80, by and large. So the math doesn't work. We're going to need more immigration, but and this is happening in countries throughout the global north. Wherever there was a baby boom after the Second World War, this is the story that's playing out as the boomers age out. And yes, we have more immigration, but that is causing another cascade of political problems, as we're seeing right now.
I was going to say the government
really
has
fractious times ahead politically and difficult times economically coming up.
I was going to say that the government, in this country, you're seeing the political impacts of it right now. We're dialing down the numbers of temporary foreign workers. There is great political pressure to do that, in part because of housing issues and other issues that are raised. What do you make of the gaps in the economy that might create if if we are going to be facing those pressures because of a declining birth rate?
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult for us to get our heads around it. Look, as I said before, we have had 40 years of effectively labor surpluses. People's consciousness don't turn around in a matter of a few years. And we had this extraordinary event of closing an economy and then reopening it, while the backdrop was this tightening labor market because of accelerating retirements. And yes, we were taking in more temporary foreign workers, 3 times as many as the immigrants we brought in. So this is a very weird way to build the economy and the society of the future on the backs of the permanently temporary. Yes, we are walking that back, but it's mostly performance art right now. We are still super reliant on the permanently temporary. And so we've got some very heavy duty kind of ethical and meta, what is society for? What is the economy for? Questions to grapple with, because the last 40 years are not predictors of the next 40 years, and we are in uncharted waters.
Elon Musk says that birth declines are one of the biggest risks to civilization. He himself has at least 11 children. He says that, he's one of the people who supports this idea of being a pronatalist. I mean, we should all have lots of kids, and that will help save the economy. What do you make of that?
Well, you can't have lots of kids without having very generous supports. You can't have lots of kids without having affordable housing so that everybody doesn't have to work to live per household. We've gone from one person in the household being the major bread earner to a minimum of 2 to get anywhere close to a comfortable standard of living. And I'm not talking about affluent. I'm just talking not going hungry and not worrying about where you're going to live next. It's terrific to be a natalist, but even in those places where countries do provide generous parental leave policies, do provide generous supports so that the working age population isn't spending all of its time providing unpaid care for those who are too young, too old, and too sick to work. Even in those countries, we're seeing birth rates fall. And I think it's got something to do with the fact that we're asking women to be just like men, but we don't want them to be just like men. We're asking them to be just like men in the economy, but we want them to keep doing what they've always been doing elsewise. And it's just, the math doesn't work. The most precious resource we have is time. And we have not figured out yet how to allocate it between the things that drive the economy and the things we need to do as humans.
So people have, any number of reasons when they decide whether or not they're going to have kids, whether they're going to have a family, whether they're going to have more than one child. What is it, just finally, I guess, you see these programs, baby bonuses and what have you, but there is also a push for greater childcare, more affordable housing, et cetera. What would move the needle, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure we need to move the needle. What we need to do is treat people as if they're important. Like when you've got the smallest working age cohort you've seen in 60 years, but less than half the pace of economic growth as a background, you're asking this smallest working age cohort to pay the bills for all the care that's needed, plus do more unpaid care. We're going to have to ask ourselves, how do we wish to help these people so that our economies don't shrink, much less grow? And I'm not sure that the child part of it, like I want to have grandchildren. I want my kids to feel like they have kids. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. But I'm not sure that this unbelievable focus on having women making more babies is the right strategy in an era where the richest countries in the world are dealing with shrinking labor forces and more antipathy towards bringing in newcomers who are not like the original, the native residents. And I say that with air quotes because I'm sure the indigenous population listening are kind of rolling their eyes. My point here is that we need to do better by one another, and we have to start treating each other as the precious resource we are, which is unlike money. And we've been chasing money, not people, for the last 40 years. It's going to take a while to change our minds about what is valuable.
That's a philosophical way to end. Armine, thank you very much.
My great pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
Armine Yalnizyan is a Canadian economist and columnist with the Toronto Star. She is also an Atkinson Fellow on the future of workers. What do you make of what she was saying in terms of how we address this. And there are a couple of different streams of the issue as she's put it forth. But I mean, the reality is, according to StatsCan, Canada's fertility rate is at an all-time low. Why is that, and what do we do about it? Your thoughts, welcome. You can email us, thecurrent@cbc.ca. We did a documentary about this a while ago in terms of why, and this is about the cost of living, but also just around other pressures that people face in terms of why they would or wouldn't have children. We could put that up for you to hear as well again. But again, any thoughts on this, email us, thecurrent@cbc.ca.